He accidentally walked into the alien women's locker room, and their reaction left him stunned. Connor Hayes crouched inside a narrow maintenance shaft, the dim blue light of his wrist display flickering across the tangled web of wires in front of him. The starship Aurelia never truly slept. Its engines thrummed day and night, vibrations carrying through the steel bones of the vessel like a heartbeat. For most crew members, it was background noise. For Connor, it was the sound of his life. He worked quietly, a small torch clamped between his teeth, hands moving with steady precision as he tightened a loose coupling. The air smelled faintly of scorched insulation, sharp and metallic. Another short circuit, another small fire waiting to happen. Connor had lost count of how many of these he had fixed since being assigned to the ship. He did not complain. He liked the work. Machines made sense. Circuits either connected or they did not. There was no judgment in steel, no whispers in the dark, no eyes sliding past him as though he were invisible. Among the crew, both human and alien, Connor was the man who passed unnoticed. He repaired things, kept the light steady and the air clean, and slipped back into the shadows before anyone remembered his name. Tonight was no different. The report had come in power fluctuations along Deck 9. Connor had traced the issue from conduit to conduit, crawling through shafts and narrow accessways, until he reached a junction he rarely visited. His wrist display pulsed with a green marker, pointing toward the far side of the corridor. He rose to his feet, wiping grease from his fingers onto his jumpsuit, and followed the line of the schematic. The Aurelia's lower decks were quiet at this hour, the silence broken only by the distant thrum of engines and the faint hiss of the air system. Rows of identical doors stretched along the corridor, each with the same steel-gray paneling. Connor paused in front of one, brow furrowing. The schematic insisted the faulty circuit ended here. Probably storage. Maybe an auxiliary power closet. He pressed the panel and the door hissed open. What he saw stopped him cold. It was not storage. The room was wide, bathed in sterile white light. A faint veil of steam hung in the air, carrying the scent of cleansing oils. And within that mist stood figures. Tall, elegant, unmistakably alien. Women. They turned toward him, their robes loose around their shoulders, their wet hair clinging to skin that shimmered in hues of violet, silver, and deep blue. For a single heartbeat, the room froze. No one spoke. No one breathed. Connor's mind went blank. His heart slammed against his ribs. Then the silence broke into laughter. One of the women covered her mouth as she chuckled. Another leaned against her companion, whispering in a teasing tone. Their silver eyes sparkled with amusement. The human technician had blundered into their private quarters, and they found it hilarious. Connor's face burned hot. He stammered an apology, already stepping back. But just before he turned away, his gaze caught something that froze him again. Not their beauty, not their teasing smiles. The scars. Long, jagged marks ran down their arms, across their shoulders, etched into their backs. Pale ridges against shimmering skin, each one a reminder of battles fought and survived. These women were not untouchable icons of alien strength. They were survivors, warriors who carried their pain on their skin like a map of everything they had endured. The laughter swirled around him, but Connor hardly heard it. He stood transfixed, not by shame anymore, but by the raw humanity those scars revealed. For the first time, he saw them not as distant figures of power, but as people. And then she stepped forward. Her presence silenced the laughter. She was taller than him, her hair as dark as midnight, cascading in sleek waves. Her skin glowed a deep violet blue, and her silver eyes shone faintly in the light, piercing straight through him. Unlike the others, she did not laugh. She did not tease. She studied him with quiet intensity, as though weighing his very soul. Connor could not move. This was Serenya, and though he did not know it yet, opening that wrong door was the beginning of everything. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The laughter of the other women faded into the background until it was little more than an echo. Serenya's silver eyes held him pinned, sharp and steady, and Connor felt the weight of her gaze, as if she could see every thought crossing his mind. Her voice, when it finally came, was low and steady. "You saw them. The marks." It was not a question. It was an accusation wrapped in quiet steel. Connor's throat tightened. He could have denied it. He could have looked away, muttered another apology, and fled. But instead, he lifted his eyes to meet hers. "I did," he said softly. His voice carried no pity, no mockery, only a simple truth. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then the words came, unplanned but certain. "Scars do not make you weaker. They mean you survived." The room grew still. The teasing voices fell silent. Even the faint hiss of the air vents seemed to fade. Serenya's expression did not change at once, but her eyes flickered, as though his words had struck something deep within her. Most men, human or alien, avoided looking at her scars. Some looked at her with awe, others with revulsion, but none with understanding, none with gentleness. And yet here stood a quiet human technician, forgotten by most of the ship, who looked at her scars as though they were not shame, but proof of strength. Connor could not read her thoughts, but he saw the small shift in her stance, the almost imperceptible easing of her shoulders. The other women exchanged glances, some smirking, some whispering, but Serenya remained focused only on him. At last she spoke again. "Leave." The word was firm, but her voice had lost the sharp edge it carried moments before. Connor did not argue. He bowed his head in apology, turned, and stepped out into the corridor. The door hissed shut behind him, leaving him alone with the echo of his heartbeat and the memory of those silver eyes. He walked quickly, his face still warm with embarrassment, but his mind replayed the scene again and again. Not the laughter, not the shame, but the look Serenya had given him when he spoke. A look that lingered, a look that made him feel, for the first time in years, that perhaps he had been noticed. Deep within the locker room, Serenya stood in silence long after the others had gone. She traced a hand across the scar running down her left arm, the jagged mark that had ended her command years ago. His words whispered back to her, unbidden. Scars mean survival. It had been a long time since anyone had dared to say such a thing to her. The days that followed slipped into routine, but something had changed. Connor went about his work as always, crawling through conduits, sealing fractures in pipes, and adjusting power relays. Yet he carried the memory of that night with him, the sharp glow of silver eyes, the scars carved across violet skin, and the words he had spoken without thinking. He did not expect to see her again. Serenya was a warrior, a figure far above the notice of a technician. Their paths rarely crossed, but fate, or something close to it, had other plans. It began with a work request, a minor malfunction in the private quarters of an officer. Connor read the notice without much thought until he saw the name. Serenya. His pulse quickened, though he told himself it was coincidence. He gathered his tools, steadying his hands as he made his way across the gleaming corridors of the Aurelia. Her quarters were larger than his, adorned with hints of alien design. Curved walls etched with faint glowing lines, fabrics that shimmered faintly as though woven from threads of starlight. Serenya stood waiting when he arrived, arms crossed, silver eyes unreadable. "The light panel flickers," she said simply, her tone giving away nothing. Connor nodded, stepping past her to kneel by the wall. He worked in silence, replacing the faulty component, but he felt her gaze on him the entire time. When he finished, he straightened, expecting her to dismiss him. Instead, she asked, "Do humans always speak so freely?" He blinked. "About what?" "About scars." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Most avoid them. You did not." Connor hesitated, then shook his head. "Avoiding them does not make them disappear. Pretending not to see them feels worse than seeing them and understanding." For a moment, her lips curved, too faint to be called a smile, more like the shadow of one. She said nothing else, but when he left her quarters, he felt certain the conversation was not finished. Over the next few days, more requests came. Small repairs, nothing urgent. A door that stuck, a vent that whined, a comm panel that buzzed faintly. Each one brought Connor back to her quarters, and each time, Serenya lingered. At first, she spoke only briefly, but slowly her words began to stretch into conversations. One evening, as he adjusted the coolant regulator in her cabin, she asked him about Earth. "Your world," she said, "is it as green as the records say?" Connor smiled faintly, keeping his eyes on the panel. "Greener. Forests so wide you could walk for days and never see the edge. Oceans that stretch farther than even this ship can travel. I used to sit on the cliffs and watch the waves until the sun went down." She listened, silent but attentive, her gaze softening with something he had not seen before. When he finally glanced at her, he caught a flicker of longing in her silver eyes. Another night, she spoke of her past. The words came slowly, as though dragged from a place she had buried deep. She told him of battles fought on shattered moons, of soldiers she had led, of wounds that had nearly taken her life. Her scars were not just marks of survival. They were memories carved into her skin. Memories of pain, loss, and choices that never left her. Connor did not interrupt. He listened, and when her voice faltered, he spoke with quiet warmth. "You carried them through it. That is not weakness, Serenya. That is strength." She looked at him for a long time after that, and though she did not reply, something unspoken passed between them. Their bond grew in stolen moments. Sometimes it was her finding excuses to call him. Sometimes it was him lingering just a little longer after finishing his work. And once it was neither of those, it was the observation deck. Connor had gone there on his own, drawn by the silence of the stars spread out before the viewing glass. He stood with his hands in his pockets, gazing at the endless black pierced by rivers of light. He did not hear her footsteps, but he knew when she arrived. The air shifted. Serenya stood beside him, her arms folded, her silver eyes reflecting the constellations. For a long time, neither spoke. The stars filled the silence, vast and eternal. Then Connor said, almost to himself, "It makes everything feel smaller. The arguments, the walls between us, even the scars. Out there, they do not matter." Her lips curved again, this time into something real. A smile, rare, fleeting but genuine. "You are strange, human," she murmured. "Strange," Connor echoed, glancing at her. "But not invisible, at least not to you." Her laughter was soft, low, and unexpected. And in that sound, Serenya discovered something she thought she had lost forever. The ability to feel lightness, to feel joy. That night marked a shift. No longer commander and technician, no longer alien and human. They were simply Serenya and Connor, two souls standing together under the same sea of stars. Whispers always found their way through the walls of a starship. At first, Connor did not notice them. He was too busy with his work, too absorbed in the quiet conversations and the unspoken warmth that had begun to bloom between him and Serenya. But soon, the murmurs reached him, carried by passing glances in the corridors and the way voices hushed when he entered a room. Some of the alien crew did not approve. To them, humans were the lesser partners in this alliance, tolerated for their persistence but never seen as equals. The idea of Serenya, a scarred warrior of high reputation, lowering herself to seek companionship with a human technician was unthinkable. The disapproval was never spoken to his face, but Connor felt it in the weight of eyes on his back, in the way conversations ended when he appeared. And sometimes, when Serenya walked beside him in the quieter halls, the silence of others was sharper than words. She noticed too. One evening in her quarters, as he adjusted the alignment on her display console, she asked without looking at him, "Do you hear them? The whispers?" Connor paused, hands still on the panel. "I hear enough," he admitted. Her silver eyes met his. "They do not approve." He gave a faint smile, almost weary. "That is their problem." Her gaze lingered, searching his face as though trying to find fear or doubt. But Connor only shrugged. "I have never been good at worrying what others think. If I had, I would have hidden in the shadows forever." The corner of her mouth curved upward, though the smile did not last long. She turned away, her voice quieter. "You may not fear their words, but there are some who act on whispers. The unease in her tone unsettled him, though he did not press her. In the days that followed, the ship's atmosphere grew heavier. Official reports spoke of small malfunctions, but Connor noticed patterns. Circuits failing in clusters. Valves jamming in sequences that did not happen by chance. He found systems tampered with, barely noticeable unless someone was looking closely. Someone was interfering. Rumors spread of traitors among the crew, voices hidden in the shadows plotting sabotage. Connor could feel the tension building like static before a storm. Every glance carried suspicion. Every silence held weight. And still, in the midst of it all, he and Serenya grew closer. They found small moments to steal from the chaos. A brief walk together through the quiet gardens on Deck 12. A shared meal where her sharp wit clashed with his dry humor until they were both laughing softly. And always, the observation deck, where the stars stretched endless and untouchable. A place where whispers could not follow. Yet even there, Serenya's guard never fully dropped. She stood tall, her expression calm, but Connor could see the shadows behind her silver eyes. Shadows born from both her past and the storm gathering within the ship. One night, as they stood in silence before the glass, she spoke in a voice so soft he almost missed it. I led soldiers once. I gave orders that sent them to their deaths. I carry their voices with me still. When I was wounded, some said it was justice. Others said it was weakness. I do not know which is worse. Connor turned toward her, his voice steady. Neither. You carry scars because you fought for them. That is not weakness, Serenya. That is what makes you stronger than the ones who whisper. Her gaze flicked to him, searching again. He expected her to turn away, to bury herself in silence as she often did. Instead, she reached out and let her hand brush his, just for a moment, before pulling it back. It was enough. But outside the safety of that moment, the storm was building. Whispers had become plans. Plans were already shifting into action. And when the Aurelia trembled days later under a sudden explosion, Connor understood that the danger had finally arrived. The alarm came like a knife in the night. A shrill siren that cut through the corridors, followed by the thundering voice of the Aurelia's system's warning of critical damage. Connor was already awake, tools scattered across the bench in his small quarters, when the floor shuddered beneath his feet. The ship groaned, metal grinding against itself, and the lights flickered. He bolted into the corridor, joining the tide of crew rushing toward their stations. Smoke curled from vents, and the acrid sting of burned circuitry filled the air. The comm crackled with frantic voices. Explosion on Deck 10. Hull breach risk. Power conduits destabilizing. Connor did not hesitate. His feet carried him toward the danger, not away from it. The lower decks were chaos. Flames licked at the walls where a ruptured conduit spat sparks across the floor. Alarms blared, drowning out shouted orders. Connor forced his way through, slipping past soldiers and engineers until he reached the source of the damage. A section of the hull plating had caved inward, torn apart by the force of the blast. Emergency seals held for now, but the system was straining. If the barrier failed, the entire deck would vent into space. He dropped to his knees, pulling his tools free, hands already moving with frantic precision. The heat singed his skin, sweat streaking down his face as he worked to stabilize the failing systems. Every second mattered. Every mistake could cost hundreds of lives. He barely noticed the pain in his palms as sharp metal tore into his skin. He barely registered the smoke clogging his lungs. His entire world narrowed to the hiss of the seals, the hum of the emergency generators, the flicker of his display as he rerouted power from failing conduits to stabilize the core. And then he noticed what was missing. Serenya. She had been on this deck during the inspection shift. His heart dropped. He scanned the smoke-filled corridor, but she was nowhere in sight. Panic surged, sharper than the fire around him. Leaving the panel half-stabilized, Connor pushed himself up and ran into the chaos. He ignored shouted warnings, ignored the flames that licked at the walls, ignored the comms demanding engineers return to their stations. He had to find her. It did not take long. The sound of steel clashing on steel guided him. In a half-collapsed chamber near the damaged bulkhead, he found her, backed against the wall, blade flashing in her hands as she fought 3 of her own kind. The saboteurs. They were aliens like her, but their eyes burned with fanatic fire. They shouted words he could not understand, their voices filled with venom. One lunged at her, striking for her throat, but Serenya's reflexes were still sharp. She parried, her blade sparking as it clashed, then drove her elbow into the attacker's chest. Another swung low, forcing her back a step. Connor froze for only a heartbeat. Then he moved. He grabbed a length of shattered conduit from the floor and charged forward. The nearest saboteur turned, surprise flashing across his face just before Connor's swing cracked against his shoulder. Pain shot up Connor's arm from the impact, but he did not stop. He threw himself between Serenya and her attackers, raising the makeshift weapon with shaking hands. One of the saboteurs snarled, striking down toward him. Connor blocked the blow clumsily, the force nearly tearing the conduit from his grip. Pain shot through his shoulder. He stumbled, and the second attacker took the opening. A blade flashed. Serenya cried out his name. Connor did not think. He moved instinctively, stepping in front of her just as the strike came. Fire tore through his side, the blade carving deep, and his vision blurred with sudden white-hot pain. He staggered but stayed on his feet, refusing to fall. The saboteur raised his weapon again, but Connor swung wildly, smashing the conduit into the attacker's knee. The alien went down with a snarl, and Connor turned, blood soaking his jumpsuit, vision swimming. Serenya's fury ignited. With a cry that echoed like thunder, she surged forward. Her blade cut clean and fast, striking with the strength of a warrior who had endured more than most could imagine. The saboteurs faltered under her onslaught. One fell, then another. The last tried to flee, but she struck him down before he could escape. And then it was over. Connor dropped the conduit, his hands slick with blood. His knees buckled, the world tilting. Serenya caught him before he hit the ground, her arms strong and trembling all at once. "You fool," she whispered, her voice raw with something he had never heard from her before, fear. Connor tried to smile, though his lips barely moved. "Could not let them take you." His vision dimmed, but he felt her hand press against his wound, desperate to hold him here, desperate not to let him slip away. And as reinforcements thundered into the chamber, weapons raised, Serenya did not let go. Connor drifted in and out of consciousness. The world around him blurred. Shadows of movement, voices that felt distant, the sting of medics working frantically at his side. Cold metal beneath his back, the sharp scent of antiseptic. But one thing never blurred. Serenya. She was there, her hand gripping his, refusing to release him even when the medics pushed her aside to stop the bleeding. He could feel her presence through the haze, the tremor in her touch betraying a fear she would never show to anyone else. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, he couldn't tell. When at last his eyes opened fully, the world settled into focus. White medbay walls, the soft hum of machinery, the dull ache in his side, wrapped in clean bandages. And Serenya, sitting beside him, her silver eyes fixed on him with an intensity that struck deeper than the wound ever had. "You're awake," she breathed, as though she'd been holding her voice inside until this moment. Connor tried to smile, though it hurt. "Guess I'm too stubborn to die." For a moment, her composure cracked. Her lips pressed together, her eyes glimmered, and her fingers tightened around his hand as if she feared he might still slip away. "You were reckless," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You stepped into a battle that was not yours. You bled for me. You think I'd just stand by?" he rasped. "Not a chance." Silence stretched between them, not empty, charged. Serenya's gaze dropped, and for the first time since he'd met her, she seemed unsure of her own strength. Slowly, she lifted her hand and brushed it across his cheek, her touch featherlight, as though she was afraid he would vanish. "I thought I was done," she said at last, her voice raw. "Done with feeling, with letting anyone close. My scars are reminders of every mistake, every failure. Every time I lost someone I should have saved. So I closed myself off, locked it all away. And then, her throat tightened. She leaned closer, her silver eyes locking on his. Then you walked into my life. You saw me. Not just the commander, not just the warrior with broken skin. But me. And still you stayed. Connor swallowed hard. His chest ached. Not from the wound this time, but from the weight of her words. Serenya, he whispered. Her voice dropped to a breath. You saw my scars, and still chose me. The room felt suspended in silence, just the two of them in that fragile moment. Connor reached up, weak but steady, and took her hand in his. He held it against his chest, over the slow, steady beat of his heart. I didn't choose despite them, he said softly. I chose because of them, because they tell me you lived. You endured. You're the strongest person I've ever known. Her breath hitched, and for the first time, Serenya let the wall around her heart crumble. She bent closer until her forehead rested lightly against his, their breaths mingling. No grand declarations, no speeches, just two broken souls finding each other in the quiet aftermath of chaos. Connor's eyes fluttered shut, not from weakness this time, but from peace. Serenya stayed there with him, her hand never leaving his, her heart no longer hidden. For the first time in years, she let herself feel hope. The days that followed passed in a rhythm of quiet recovery. Connor healed slowly, the wound closing, the ache fading with time. But what surprised him most was not the progress of his body. It was the constant presence of Serenya. She was there every day, sometimes silent, sitting at his side as he dozed, sometimes sharing fragments of her past, stories of battlefields under alien suns, of victories that felt hollow, of losses that had never left her. He listened not as a soldier or commander might, but as a man who cared. And she, for the first time in years, allowed someone to see the weight she carried. When Connor was strong enough to walk, she was the one who offered her arm, steadying him. At first he resisted, embarrassed. But Serenya only smirked, that proud warrior grin softening in his presence. You carried me once, she teased. Now let me carry you. It was in those small moments, the half-smile she gave when he cracked a joke, the warmth in her gaze when she thought he was not looking, that Connor realized something had changed. Serenya no longer hid her scars, no longer flinched when eyes lingered on the marks across her skin. She carried herself openly, as if finally unburdened. And the crew noticed. Whispers that once carried doubt and disapproval began to fade. Some still muttered that humans were lesser, unworthy of warriors like Serenya. But others, seeing the bond between them, saw something different: courage, loyalty, and a kind of love that crossed all boundaries. One evening, when Connor had regained his full strength, Serenya walked beside him through the long corridor of the Aurelia. The ship's hum filled the silence, steady and familiar. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, silver and infinite. They moved shoulder to shoulder, their steps in quiet rhythm. Strange, is it not? Serenya murmured, her eyes glinting with faint amusement. All of this began because you opened the wrong door. Connor chuckled under his breath. Best mistake I ever made. For a moment, Serenya's expression softened completely. No armor, no masks, just her. Violet blue skin glowing faintly in the corridor lights, silver eyes warm and unguarded. She reached for his hand, fingers brushing his before settling into his grasp. Her grip was strong, unashamed. Connor squeezed back, meeting her gaze. Through a wrong door, he said quietly. I found the right heart. Serenya smiled. Not the fleeting smirk of a warrior, but a smile born of peace, of something real. And together, they walked on, scars and all, no longer invisible, no longer alone. In the vast silence of space, love had found them where neither had ever expected it. Through chance, through pain, through the courage to see beyond scars. And it was only the beginning.